I remember that evening in vivid detail. Like always, I waited for her to come home from work. The house was spotless, the dinner carefully prepared and arranged on the plates. Candles flickered on the table, casting warm shadows across the room, and the air carried the scent of spices. I wanted the evening to be special, even though I knew it wouldn't mean anything to Alice. She walked in, pulling off her expensive coat without a glance in my direction. She tossed it carelessly onto a chair and made her way to the kitchen. Her heels clicked loudly against the marble floor. I waited, hoping for some sort of greeting, a word, a look, anything. But, as always, there was only silence. "Dinner's ready," I said, keeping my voice steady. Alice opened a bottle of wine, poured herself a full glass, and took a long sip. Only then did she turn to me, her gaze sharp and dismissive. "Chicken again," she said flatly, swirling the wine in her glass. I forced a small smile, trying to ignore the sting in her words. "I thought you liked it." She sighed dramatically, setting her glass down with a clink. "I do, but you could try a little harder. Maybe something gourmet for once." God, Michael, is it really that hard to be creative? I clenched my jaw, swallowing the words I wanted to say. This wasn't new. This was every night. A constant reminder that no matter what I did, no matter how much I tried, it was never enough. She walked past me, her perfume lingering in the air, and sat down at the dining table. She didn't thank me for the meal. She didn't acknowledge the effort. Instead, she pulled out her phone, scrolling through messages as if I wasn't even in the room. I sat across from her, my appetite fading. The food on my plate blurred as frustration boiled inside me. "How was work?" I asked, forcing casual conversation. She didn't look up. "Busy." Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. I watched as she scrolled through her phone, her lips curving slightly at something she read. A text from someone, no doubt. A name flashed across the screen before she tilted it away. Nathan. I knew better than to ask. I had done that before, and it had only led to laughter, to condescending remarks about how insecure and pathetic I was. So, I swallowed my anger, just like I had done 1,000 times before. She finally looked up at me, her eyes assessing, calculating. "You know, Michael, I think we need to have a serious talk." My stomach tightened. Those words never meant anything good. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs. "I need you to stop acting so needy. It's exhausting." I frowned. "Needy?" She rolled her eyes. "Yes, needy. Always looking for my attention, always waiting for me like some lost puppy. It's suffocating." I stared at her, stunned. I just wanted to have dinner with my wife. And I just wanted to come home and relax without feeling guilty about not entertaining you. She shot back. I opened my mouth, then closed it. There was no winning with her. She took another sip of wine, her expression unreadable. "Look, Michael, I'm going to be honest with you. If you want this to work, you need to do as I say. No more questioning me, no more whining, no more acting like a lovesick idiot." I felt the walls closing in around me, the weight of years of submission pressing down on my chest. "And if I don't?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She smirked, tilting her head. "Then no more intimacy. No more marriage. You either follow my rules, or this is over." I exhaled slowly, my hands curling into fists under the table. She stood, finishing her wine in one smooth motion. "Now clean this up. I'm exhausted." She walked past me without another word, disappearing into the bedroom, leaving me alone at the table. I sat there for a long time, staring at the untouched food on my plate. My fingers tightened around the fork, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. That was the moment something inside me snapped. This wasn't love. This wasn't a marriage. This was a prison, and I was done being her prisoner. I sat at the dinner table long after Alice had left the room, staring at the flickering candlelight. My untouched food had gone cold, but I barely noticed. The weight of her words pressed down on me, suffocating, inescapable. "You either follow my rules, or this is over." The ultimatum rang in my head over and over again, like a cruel echo I couldn't silence. For 5 years, I had lived like this, walking on eggshells, trying to please a woman who saw me as nothing more than an accessory to her carefully curated life. I had sacrificed everything for her. My career, my dreams, my dignity. And for what? To be treated like an inconvenience? To be ridiculed and dismissed? My hands clenched into fists. A slow, creeping realization settled over me. This is not love. This is control. And the worst part? I had allowed it. I had let her mold me into this weak, obedient shell of a man, afraid to speak up, afraid to fight back. But something inside me had shifted tonight. Something dark and cold, something I hadn't felt in years, anger. I pushed my chair back and stood up. The house was silent, the only sound the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. The scent of the now ruined dinner lingered in the air, a reminder of yet another wasted effort. I moved to the kitchen and began cleaning up, but this time, it wasn't out of duty. It was out of necessity. I needed something to occupy my hands, something to keep my mind from spiraling into the rage that was building inside me. As I washed the dishes, my mind drifted back to the past. Before Alice, I had been different. I had been ambitious. I had a promising career in the tech industry, developing software for a startup that was on the verge of breaking into the big leagues. I had worked tirelessly, putting in long hours, sacrificing sleep, all for the dream of success. And then Alice had come into my life. She was beautiful, confident, and unlike anyone I had ever met. She had a presence that commanded attention, a sharp intelligence that was both alluring and intimidating. When she set her sights on me, I had been helpless against her charm. She made me feel special, like I was the only man in the world who mattered. But it didn't take long for the cracks to show. At first, it was small things. Comments about how I dressed, how I spoke. Gentle corrections that soon turned into biting criticisms. She had a way of making me feel inadequate, of making me question myself, and before I knew it, I was changing. I stopped hanging out with my friends because she didn't like them. I left my job at the startup because she convinced me that a more stable career was better for our future. I adapted, I adjusted, and I convinced myself that it was for the best. But it was never enough. No matter what I did, no matter how much I gave, she always wanted more. More control, more power. And the more she took, the less of me remained. I finished washing the dishes and wiped my hands on a towel, staring at my reflection in the kitchen window. I barely recognized the man looking back at me. Tired eyes, slumped shoulders, the weight of years of emotional manipulation dragging me down. A sudden noise from upstairs broke my thoughts. The sound of a drawer slamming shut. Alice, no doubt, getting ready for bed. Another night of her sleeping soundly while I lay awake, suffocating under the weight of my own silence. But not tonight. Tonight, I wasn't going to lie there, consumed by anger and regret. I needed a plan. I needed to take my life back. I walked into my office and shut the door behind me. My desk was cluttered with papers, old bills, and reminders of a life I had let slip through my fingers. I sat down and turned on my computer. My hands hovered over the keyboard for a moment before I started typing. Private investigator, discreet services, Los Angeles. I scrolled through the search results, scanning the list of agencies that promised confidentiality and results. My heart pounded as I clicked on a website, my mind racing. What am I doing? Is this too much? But then I remembered the way she had laughed at me tonight. The way she had thrown her ultimatum in my face as if my worth as a husband, as a man, was nothing more than a bargaining chip. No, this wasn't too much. This was long overdue. I filled out an inquiry form, keeping my message brief but clear. I need information on my wife. Possible infidelity. Financial discrepancies. Urgent. I hesitated for only a second before hitting send. A cold satisfaction settled over me. The game had changed. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one being controlled. I wasn't the one blindly accepting the life Alice had carved out for me. I was taking the first step toward freedom. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. The anger hadn't disappeared, but now, it had a purpose. A direction. Alice thought she had won. That she could dictate the terms of our marriage, of my life. She had no idea what was coming. The next morning felt different. The air in the house was thick with tension, though Alice seemed completely unaware. She moved through the kitchen with her usual air of superiority, sipping her coffee, scrolling through her phone, barely acknowledging my presence. It was a routine I had grown used to, her silent dismissal, the way she made me feel invisible in my own home. But today, I wasn't the same man I had been yesterday. I sat across from her at the table, my hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee. I watched her carefully, studying every detail. The slight smirk on her lips as she read something on her phone, the casual way she adjusted the silk robe around her shoulders. She looked completely at ease, completely confident in her control over me. It made my stomach turn. I had spent years catering to her every whim, allowing myself to be reshaped into the perfect, obedient husband. But last night, something had shifted. Last night, I had taken the first step in reclaiming my life. I had received a response from the private investigator just before going to bed. The email was simple, professional, and to the point. I can take the case. I'll need details. Let's meet. I had responded immediately, setting up an appointment for that evening. I didn't know exactly what I was hoping to find, but I knew one thing for certain. Alice had secrets, and I was going to uncover every single one of them. As Alice scrolled through her phone, I noticed a flicker of amusement in her expression. A quiet laugh. She tilted the screen slightly away from me, but I had already caught a glimpse of the name at the top of the message thread, Nathan. It wasn't the first time I had seen that name. I had spotted it before, late at night when she thought I was asleep, when she would smile at her phone, her fingers moving swiftly over the keyboard. It had always been there, lingering in the background of our life, like a shadow I wasn't allowed to acknowledge. But now I would. She stood up, finishing the last sip of her coffee. I have meetings all day, she said casually, as if I cared. She didn't wait for my response before heading upstairs to get dressed. I sat there for a long time after she left, staring at my reflection in the glossy surface of my coffee. My heart pounded in my chest, my hands tight around the mug. The anger I had felt last night was still there, but now it was controlled, focused. By the time I left for my meeting with the investigator, I was ready for whatever truth he was about to uncover. The office was tucked away in a small building downtown, an unassuming place with frosted windows and a single metal plaque on the door, Ray Dawson, Private Investigations. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The air smelled of old leather and stale coffee. A man in his early 50s sat behind a desk, flipping through a file. He looked up when I entered, his sharp blue eyes assessing me in a way that made it clear he had done this 1,000 times before. "You must be Michael," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Sit." I did as he said, feeling a strange mix of nerves and anticipation. "What exactly are we looking for?" Dawson asked, pulling out a notepad. I exhaled slowly. "I think my wife is having an affair," I admitted. "But that's not all. I need to know everything. Who she's talking to, where she goes when she says she's working, what she's hiding from me financially. If there's something to be found, I need to know it." Dawson nodded, jotting down notes. "I'll need access to anything you can give me. Her schedule, phone records if you have them, any suspicious behavior. The more I have to work with, the faster we get results." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small notebook. Over the past few weeks, I had started keeping track of everything. Times she left the house, the phone calls she took in private, the names I had glimpsed on her screen. I slid it across the desk. Dawson raised an eyebrow, flipping through the pages. "You've been paying attention." "She made me invisible," I said bitterly. "That doesn't mean I stopped watching." He gave a small nod of approval. "Good. I'll start with the basics. Follow her, check financial records, see who this Nathan really is. If she's hiding something, we'll find it." I stood up, shaking his hand firmly. "Whatever it takes." As I left the office, a strange sense of satisfaction settled over me. For the first time in years, I wasn't just reacting to Alice's cruelty. I was taking control. But I had no idea just how deep the deception went. That night, Alice came home late. I was sitting in the living room, pretending to read a book, but my attention was entirely on her. She walked in with the same air of confidence, her black dress hugging her figure, her lipstick still perfect. She smelled like wine and expensive perfume. She didn't even glance at me as she set her purse down on the counter. She was texting someone, her fingers moving quickly. I didn't have to guess who it was. She sighed, finally acknowledging my presence. "You're still up?" I turned a page in my book, not looking at her. "Couldn't sleep." She made a sound of disinterest, kicking off her heels. "You should try harder," she muttered, walking past me toward the bedroom. I listened as she shut the door behind her. My fists clenched at my sides. She had no idea that this time I was watching. And soon, she would regret ever thinking she could keep her secrets from me. The next few days passed in a blur, but something had changed. Not in Alice. She was the same as ever, moving through our home with the confidence of someone who had everything under control. She still barely acknowledged my presence unless it was to criticize or dismiss me, still spent hours glued to her phone, laughing at messages I wasn't meant to see. No, the change was in me. I no longer felt the same desperate need to gain her approval. I no longer cared if she looked at me with contempt, if she sighed in exasperation every time I spoke. That part of me, the part that had spent years craving even the smallest sign of affection from her, was dead. And now, all that remained was purpose. Ray Dawson worked fast. Every morning, I woke up to an update in my inbox, and each one painted a clearer picture of the woman I had married. Alice wasn't just having an affair. She was living an entirely separate life. The man from the texts, Nathan, wasn't just some casual fling. He was wealthy, well-connected, and dangerous. Dawson had found enough on him to suggest that he wasn't just some businessman Alice had seduced. He had a criminal past. Nothing obvious, nothing that had ever led to an arrest, but there were whispers of fraud, offshore accounts, and ties to people who operated outside the law. And Alice was right in the middle of it. She had secret accounts, all carefully hidden from me. Dawson had traced large transactions, money moving from one account to another, siphoned off from the investments we had made together over the years. She had been stealing from me, slowly, carefully, making sure that when she was ready to leave, she would take everything. The betrayal was so thorough, so deliberate, that it stunned me. It wasn't just that she didn't love me. It wasn't just that she wanted someone else. She had planned to gut me financially, leaving me with nothing. I sat at my desk that night, staring at the reports Dawson had sent me. The copies of transactions, the surveillance photos of her and Nathan meeting in a private hotel bar, the text messages she had sent from a burner phone. I had always known she was cruel. But this was calculated destruction. I closed my eyes, taking slow, steady breaths. There was no room for heartbreak anymore. Only strategy. The key to taking someone like Alice down wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge driven by emotion. No, I had to be smarter than that. I had to be careful. Because if she was willing to do all this without me suspecting, what else was she capable of? I needed to turn the tables. Alice started noticing the change in me after a week. She had been so accustomed to my silence, to my submission, that she didn't know what to do when I stopped responding the way she expected. When she insulted me, I didn't react. When she ignored me, I acted as if I didn't care. I was no longer the man she controlled, and I could see the frustration building behind her cold, sharp eyes. One evening, she tested me. We were in the kitchen, her pouring herself another glass of wine, me finishing my dinner. She leaned against the counter, watching me as if trying to solve a puzzle. "You've been different lately," she said, her voice casual, but laced with suspicion. I barely glanced at her. "Have I?" She swirled the wine in her glass, studying me. "Yes, you have." I let the silence stretch between us, feeling her gaze like a knife against my skin. I could almost hear the gears turning in her mind, trying to figure out what had changed. But I didn't give her anything. She thrived on power, on control, on the ability to provoke a reaction from me. But now, I was nothing more than a blank slate, unreadable, unpredictable. And it drove her crazy. She set her glass down with a sharp clink. "Whatever it is you're doing, stop," she said flatly. I looked up at her then, really looked at her. And for the first time in years, I saw fear. It was small, barely there, but it was real. I had disrupted her carefully built reality, and she hated it. I stood up, rinsed my plate in the sink, and turned to her with a slow, deliberate smile. "I have no idea what you're talking about." And then I left the room. That night, I received another message from Dawson. "We need to talk. Urgent." I stepped outside to call him, the night air cool against my skin. His voice was tense, serious. "Michael, this is bigger than I thought." I gripped the phone tighter. "Tell me." Dawson exhaled. "Your wife is into something deep. This guy, Nathan, he's more than just some rich businessman. He's dangerous. And from what I can tell, Alice has been working with him. I don't know what their end game is yet, but it's not just an affair. It's something else." A cold chill ran through me. I had suspected something, but hearing it confirmed made it feel all too real. "What do you mean, working with him?" I asked. "I mean, she's helping him move money. Money that isn't hers. Offshore accounts, fake investments. Your name is tied to some of these transactions, which means if this goes south, guess who takes the fall?" My blood ran cold. Alice wasn't just planning to leave me. She was planning to ruin me. Set me up, let the blame land on me, and walk away clean. I clenched my jaw, my free hand curling into a fist. She thought she had everything under control. She thought I was still too weak to fight back. She was wrong. I didn't just want to leave her. I wanted to destroy her first. I stood outside, my phone still clutched in my hand, Dawson's words echoing in my head. She's not just leaving you, Michael. She's setting you up. The cool night air did nothing to settle the fire burning inside me. Alice had spent years breaking me down, piece by piece, stripping me of my confidence, my independence, my dignity. I had thought I was nothing more than an afterthought to her, a man she had long grown bored of. But I had been wrong. I wasn't just disposable to Alice. I was useful, a name, a tool, a scapegoat. And now, she was preparing to erase me completely. I gripped the phone tighter. I had been ready for her betrayal. I had expected her infidelity, her lies, her cruelty. But I hadn't expected this. I hadn't expected her to weave such a calculated, intricate plan, one that didn't just end with her walking away, but with me taking the fall. The rage inside me solidified into something sharper, colder. I had spent too many years being her pawn. That ended now. I walked back into the house, moving through the dimly lit hallway, past the perfectly arranged furniture, the expensive decor that Alice had chosen down to the last detail. None of it had ever been ours. It had always been hers. She was upstairs, in our bedroom, oblivious to what I now knew. The thought of her lying there, confident in her control over me, made my stomach turn. I wanted to confront her. I wanted to rip the truth out of her, to see the fear in her eyes when she realized she had lost. But that would be too easy. Alice thrived on power, on control. If I wanted to beat her, I had to strip it away piece by piece, the same way she had done to me. I had to make her feel helpless. I went into my office, shutting the door behind me. My hands moved on autopilot, pulling up my laptop, opening the folder where I had stored every piece of information Dawson had sent me. Bank records, surveillance photos, text messages, a digital blueprint of Alice's deception. I stared at the screen, my mind working faster than it had in years. There was a way to turn this against her. I just had to be smart. I grabbed a blank notepad and started writing. Step 1. Secure my own finances. The first thing Alice had tried to do was drain me financially. If she thought she had already succeeded, then she had made a mistake. I still had access to one hidden account. The savings I had set aside before we were married, before I had foolishly merged everything with her. It wasn't much, but it was enough. By morning, every cent would be transferred into an account under a new name. Alice would think I was still standing on a financial cliff's edge. She wouldn't know that I had already moved to safety. Step 2. Make her look guilty. She had tied my name to her fraudulent activities. That meant, if I wasn't careful, I would be the one answering to the authorities. But she had been sloppy. She had left a digital trail. And thanks to Dawson, I had the proof I needed. I started compiling a dossier, evidence that showed Alice was the mastermind behind everything. Every fraudulent transfer, every offshore account, every illegal deal. I organized it meticulously, preparing it for when I would need to make my move. Step 3. Let her think she's winning. This was the hardest part. I had to act like nothing had changed. I had to let her believe I was still the obedient, clueless husband she had spent years molding into submission. She couldn't suspect that I knew. Not yet. If she thought her plan was working, she would get reckless. And when she got reckless, she would make mistakes. I shut the laptop, exhaling slowly. The plan was in motion. By the time Alice realized what was happening, it would already be too late. The next morning, I watched her carefully. She was in the kitchen, dressed in her tailored blouse and skirt, sipping her coffee as she read her emails. She looked completely composed, completely in control. But I noticed the small things now. The way she checked her phone more often than usual. The way her fingers tapped absently against the counter, a subtle sign of impatience. She was waiting. For what? I wasn't sure yet. But I knew one thing. It wouldn't be good for me. I walked into the room, keeping my expression neutral. Busy day. She barely glanced at me. Always. I poured myself coffee, moving to the other side of the kitchen. You working late tonight? A small smirk touched her lips. Possibly. What? I shrugged. Just curious. She studied me then, eyes narrowing slightly, as if trying to read something in my face. For a moment, I thought she might ask more. But instead, she just picked up her phone and walked out, leaving me alone with my thoughts. That night, Dawson sent me one final message. Michael, I found something. Meet me. Urgent. I left without telling Alice where I was going. I drove across the city, my grip tight on the steering wheel. When I arrived at Dawson's office, he was waiting for me, his usual calm demeanor replaced with something else, something like concern. He pushed a file across the desk. "You need to see this." I opened it, scanning the pages. And then I saw it. A contract. A hit contract. My name was on it. My body went cold. Alice hadn't just planned to frame me. She had planned to get rid of me entirely. I looked up at Dawson, my heartbeat hammering in my chest. "Is this real?" He nodded grimly. "Very real. And Michael, you don't have much time." I gripped the edges of the file, my vision blurring for a second. Alice didn't just want to ruin me. She wanted me dead. And I had just been playing along. But now it was time to end this game, once and for all. My fingers tightened around the file, the weight of its contents settling in my chest like a boulder. The words on the page blurred for a moment, but the meaning was crystal clear. Alice had taken her plan one step further than I had ever imagined. She hadn't just been preparing to ruin me. She had been preparing to eliminate me entirely. A hit contract. She had paid someone to make sure I disappeared. A slow, cold rage spread through me. This wasn't just betrayal. This was premeditated murder. Dawson watched me carefully from across the desk. "You need to act fast," he said, his voice steady but urgent. "If this contract is in circulation, someone out there is already looking for an opportunity." I inhaled sharply, forcing my mind to steady. I couldn't afford to react with fear. Alice was smart, calculating. If she sensed any change in me, she would know I was onto her. And if she knew that, she might accelerate her timeline. No, I had to stay in control. I had to be smarter than her. I closed the file carefully and set it aside. "Can you find out who she hired?" Dawson nodded. "I already have a lead. It's someone from Nathan's circle, someone known for keeping things clean." He exhaled. "But that means it's not just Alice. Nathan is in on this too." That didn't surprise me. The moment I had learned about her involvement with him, I had suspected that her plans went beyond just financial theft. But murder? That was another level entirely. Dawson leaned forward. "Michael, listen to me. You can't just sit on this information. If you go home like nothing is wrong, you're walking into a death trap." I shook my head. "I can't let her know I found this." "Not yet." Dawson frowned. "What are you planning?" I met his gaze. "I'm going to make her think she's won. And then I'm going to take everything from her." I drove home in complete silence, my mind methodically organizing every move I needed to make. Alice thought she was the puppet master. She thought she had outplayed me. But now I was going to turn the strings against her. When I arrived home, the house was quiet. The lights were dimmed, and the only sound was the faint hum of the central air. Alice wasn't in the living room, which meant she was either in her office or already in bed. I moved through the house with practiced ease, every movement controlled, deliberate. If she had truly gone so far as to hire someone to kill me, that meant she was waiting for something. The right moment. The perfect opportunity. And that meant I still had time. I went into my office, locking the door behind me. I pulled up my laptop and started working. Step 1. Expose Alice and Nathan. The dossier I had been compiling was already thorough, but now I had to refine it. I organized the evidence into categories: financial fraud, offshore accounts, illegal investments, and now, attempted murder. I prepared everything to be leaked to the authorities and the media. Alice and Nathan had been careful, but they had made one mistake. They underestimated me. Step 2. Control the timing. I needed to ensure that when Alice's world came crashing down, she wouldn't have time to retaliate. If she realized I had evidence against her before I was ready to make my move, she might disappear before the authorities could act. I scheduled emails containing every piece of damning evidence to be sent to law enforcement, the FBI, and major financial regulators. But the emails wouldn't send yet. They were timed, and I would be the one to decide when they went out. Step 3. Make Alice feel safe. This was the hardest part. I had to wake up tomorrow and act like nothing had changed. I had to smile, play the part of the oblivious husband, let her think that her plan was moving forward. Because once she believed she had already won, she would make mistakes. And when she did, I would be ready. The next morning, I followed through with the act. Alice was already awake when I came downstairs, dressed in one of her perfectly tailored outfits, sipping coffee at the kitchen island. She barely acknowledged me, as usual. I kept my expression neutral, my voice calm. "Morning," I said casually. She glanced up briefly. "Morning." I moved around the kitchen, pretending everything was normal. I made coffee, checked my phone, Even flipped through the morning newspaper like I wasn't staring at a woman who had ordered my death. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed her watching me. She was assessing me, waiting for something. I forced myself to yawn slightly, rubbing my eyes. Didn't sleep well last night, I muttered. She smiled then. A small, knowing smile. That's too bad, she said smoothly, sipping her coffee. That smile told me everything I needed to know. She knew something was coming, and she thought I had no idea. That night, I set the final piece of my plan in motion. I had one final meeting with Dawson. We arranged for hidden cameras to be placed inside the house. Every conversation, every movement Alice made, would be recorded. And then, we waited. The trap was set. All I needed was for Alice to make the final move. 3 days later, it happened. I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating. A single text message. It's happening tonight. Dawson. I lay there in the darkness, staring at the screen, my heart pounding not with fear, but with anticipation. Tonight, Alice thought she would be free of me forever. Tonight, she thought she would finally be rid of the man she had spent years controlling. But tonight, she was the one who was going to lose everything. The text from Dawson confirmed what I already knew. Tonight was the night Alice had been waiting for. Tonight was the night she thought she would finally be rid of me. I lay in bed for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling, letting the reality of it settle over me. She truly believed she had won. That knowledge filled me with something dark, something cold. But there was no fear, no hesitation, only the quiet, absolute certainty that this would end my way, not hers. I climbed out of bed and moved through the house, keeping my movements casual. Alice was already awake, sitting in the living room with her laptop, pretending to work. She glanced up as I passed. I could feel her eyes on me, watching, waiting. She was expecting me to disappear tonight. Instead, I was going to make sure that she did. As the sun set, I went through my final preparations. I had already set my plan in motion. Emails scheduled to go out, authorities alerted, evidence ready to be used at the perfect moment. But there was still one thing left to do. I had to let Alice believe she was in control right up until the final second. At 8 p.m., she announced she had to step out for a meeting. The lie came so effortlessly from her lips that if I didn't know better, I might have believed her. But I knew exactly where she was going. Nathan and the hitman. She thought she was walking into the final step of her plan, but instead, she was walking straight into her own destruction. I followed her. Not closely. Not obviously. I had planned for this. I already knew where she was going, so I stayed 3 cars behind, careful not to draw attention. She drove across the city to a small, private parking lot near an upscale restaurant. From where I was parked, I could see her exit the car and walk toward the rear of the lot, disappearing behind a dark corner. I parked and waited, my heart steady, my mind clear. Dawson was already inside, setting up the final stage. The cameras were rolling. The authorities had been tipped off. All I had to do now was let Alice and Nathan bury themselves. I stepped out of my car and moved toward the back of the parking lot. I could hear their voices before I saw them. Alice was speaking in a low, urgent tone. Nathan was responding, his voice calm, controlled. They were discussing me, confirming that tonight was the night, that everything had been arranged. And then, I heard another voice. The hitman. His tone was detached, professional. He was asking when and where. Alice and Nathan gave their final instructions, and then I stepped forward. The moment Alice saw me, her entire body tensed. Her face went pale. "Michael," she breathed. "What are you doing here?" I smiled. "Just wanted to see how this all ends." Her eyes darted to Nathan, then to the hitman. For the first time in her life, she looked trapped. Nathan took a step forward. "This isn't what you think," he started. I let out a small laugh. "It's exactly what I think." And then, before either of them could react, I pulled out my phone and pressed send. In an instant, every scheduled email was released. To the police, to financial regulators, to the FBI, to major media outlets. Every piece of evidence against Alice and Nathan was now out in the open. Their bank fraud, their money laundering, their illegal deals, and most importantly, the recording of them ordering my murder. Alice's face twisted in horror as her phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced at the screen, realizing exactly what had happened. And then, the siren started. Flashing red and blue lights filled the parking lot. Officers swarmed the area, guns drawn, voices shouting commands. Nathan tried to run. He didn't get far. Alice stood frozen as officers surrounded her. I saw the exact moment she realized it was over. She turned to me, desperation in her eyes. "Michael, please." I cut her off with a single look. She had spent years breaking me down. She had spent years making me feel powerless. And now, she was the one with nothing left. The officers grabbed her arms, forcing them behind her back as they cuffed her. She screamed my name, begged, tried to twist the narrative, but it was too late. No one was listening anymore. She was dragged toward the police car. Nathan was thrown into another. The hitman was already on the ground, restrained. I stood there, watching it all unfold, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. The trial was swift. The evidence was overwhelming. The financial records, the offshore accounts, the fraudulent transactions, it was all there, irrefutable. And the recording of Alice and Nathan conspiring to have me killed sealed their fate. Alice received 25 years for conspiracy to commit murder and financial fraud. Nathan got even more. The hitman took a plea deal, revealing even more about their operations in exchange for a lesser sentence. By the time it was over, they had lost everything. And me? I was free. I sold the house, moved to a new city, started fresh. For the first time in years, I felt like myself again. No more walking on eggshells. No more silence. No more fear. Alice had spent years trying to control me. But in the end, I was the one who controlled how this ended.